These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. Lieutenant General Hisao Tani, commander of Japan's 6th Division, was convicted by a Chinese war crimes tribunal for crimes linked to the 1937 Nanjing atrocities. He was executed in Nanjing on April 26, 1947. Photographer Gilles Perez captured this image during the Bosnian War, showing an unidentified Bosnian soldier crying beside a tree while holding a rifle. It is commonly dated around 1995. This photo is linked to the Warsaw Uprising, which began on August 1, 1944, when the Polish Home Army tried to seize the city from German occupation. It shows insurgents in helmets moving through rubble with a flamethrower-style weapon and fuel tanks. A circus handler poses in front of an ornate wagon while a small acrobat stands on his shoulder and waves to the camera. Traveling circuses used carved wagons like this as mobile stages and animal cages to attract crowds before the performance. This is the New York Daily News front page from December 1, 1952, reporting on American transgender woman Christine Jorgensen after her gender-affirming medical treatment in Denmark. On November 14, 1970, Southern Airways Flight 932, carrying the Marshall University football team, crashed while approaching Tri-State Airport in Huntington, West Virginia. All 75 people on board died, including 37 players, along with coaches, staff. These X-ray images from inspections on the United States and Mexico border show living people hidden inside a cargo truck, a tank, and a suitcase. They prove how X-ray scanners reveal human outlines through metal and plastic when a normal look can miss everything. This image is circulated as a Vsevolozhsk photo, dated February 11, 1988, showing a broken window with a face-like shape in the damaged glass. Newly freed inmates at the Bergen-Belsen camp wait in line for food in striped uniforms. Life magazine photographer George Roger photographed this in April 1945 while embedded with Britain's 11th Armored Division. The Great Chicago Fire began on October 8, 1871, and burned for about 2 days, destroying much of the city. About 300 people died, and roughly 100,000 residents were left without homes. This photo is captioned as a reunion in Haifa in 1946 of a husband and wife separated during a 1941 deportation. Goodwood, Sussex, 1940. Members of Britain's Home Guard escort 2 captured German airmen across a field. The smoke behind them is from their Heinkel, a 111 bomber, after it came down nearby. This photo shows crews on the French freighter Grand Camp in Texas City on April 16, 1947, as smoke rises from a cargo of ammonium nitrate. Soon after, a huge explosion set off a chain of blasts and fires, and at least 581 people died. Tenerife Airport, 1977. A Pan Am Boeing 747 sits behind the KLM 747, named the Flying Dutchman, in heavy fog. Minutes later, the 2 jets collided on the runway, killing 583 people in the deadliest accident in aviation history. New York City, Morton Street at Bedford, March 17, 1893. The street is piled with horse manure from a city where horses powered transport. In the late 1890s, the Great Manure Crisis became a famous public sanitation fear, and motor vehicles later removed most horse waste from city streets. April 1929. A suspicious parcel addressed to Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt was displayed at New York City's Central Post Office after it was found before it could do harm. Postal porter Thomas Callagy later confessed he made and placed it, saying he wanted a promotion for discovering it. In 1913, Sarah Rector received a 160-acre land allotment in Oklahoma that officials had classified as poor farmland. Oil was later found on her land, and royalty payments made her so wealthy that newspapers called her a millionaire while she was still a teenager. A test site house is photographed after a weapons test, and the caption notes it was 7,500 feet from the impact point. Such staged houses were built to measure blast pressure and heat, on ordinary homes for civil defense research. On January 8, 1945, United States Army Corporal Charles S. McNulty was photographed kneeling in snow at a small field altar in Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge from December 1944 to January 1945 was Germany's last major offensive on the Western Front. Belfast, Northern Ireland, May 1981. School children pose and play beside a British soldier on street patrol. The photo captures how daily life continued in working-class districts even while the Troubles kept troops on the streets. Philippines, 1945. Lieutenant Colonel Louis Edward Kurds poses in his P-51 Mustang Bad Angel with victory marks for German, Italian, and Japanese aircraft. He is one of only 3 American pilots credited with downing planes from all 3 major Axis powers. South Australia, 1943. 2 young women use oxy-welding torches to assemble parts for ammunition boxes in a factory. Australia expanded wartime production by recruiting large numbers of women into industrial trades as many men served overseas. Atlanta, September 25, 1969. Werner von Braun poses at an Apollo 11 moon landing exhibition beside a lunar module display. As director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, he led the Saturn V rocket program that sent Apollo 11 to the moon 2 months earlier. United States Navy photo NH-4-1871 shows a crowded sleeping area at the Naval Training Station in San Francisco, California. Rows of bunks are separated by hanging fabric partitions, creating hundreds of narrow cubicles inside one large hall. In 1938, New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia sat between Cheyenne and Arapaho leaders during a ceremonial peace pipe event while wearing a feather headdress. Press reports said he was given the honorary name Chief of the Rising Clouds at the ceremony. Chicago River, July 24, 1915. The passenger steamer SS Eastland rolled onto its side while still near the dock during boarding for a Western Electric Company outing. 844 people died, making it one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in United States history. Moscow, July 17, 1944. Captured German soldiers are assembled before being marched through the city in the Parade of the Defeated. About 57,000 prisoners of war from Soviet victories in Operation Bagration were paraded under NKVD guard along a set route through Moscow. Lakehurst, New Jersey, 1928. The German airship Graf Zeppelin is moored on the ground years before the Hindenburg disaster. Graf Zeppelin later completed the first around-the-world flight by airship in 1929. 1949, an American Airlines Douglas DC-3 flies low over an airfield as a horse-drawn stagecoach races past in the foreground. The contrast shows how passenger travel jumped from 19th-century coaches to twin-engine airliners within one lifetime. Bosnia and Herzegovina, February 1996. An American and a Russian peacekeeper trade field rations beside an armored vehicle. They were serving under the post-war NATO-led mission created after the Dayton Peace Agreement. In 1937, Joseph Stalin was photographed casting a ballot in the first election to the Supreme Soviet of the Soviet Union. Official results reported near universal support for the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and its allies, reflecting a one-party system. Boston, 1919. Police officers stack seized books and pamphlets beside a police ambulance truck during the Red Scare era. Raids in that period often targeted socialist and anarchist literature, and the images were used to show confiscation as public proof. Beijing, June 2, 1989. Residents crowd onto the roof of a public bus to watch events near Tiananmen Square. This was 2 days before the military crackdown on June 3 to June 4, 1989. The Little Rock Nine integrated Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas in September 1957 under federal protection after state officials resisted court-ordered desegregation. 1972. An early Pong arcade cabinet, one of the first commercially successful video games, is shown with Atari staff. Pong began as a coin-operated bar game and helped launch the arcade boom that shaped the video game industry. Romania, between the two world wars. This image is widely captioned as Nicoleta Nicolescu leading Iron Guard women at a summer camp with a raised arm salute. The Iron Guard was a Romanian far-right movement active from 1927 to 1941, and it built youth and women's groups to spread its ideas. Wilmington, North Carolina, November 10, 1898. An armed mob poses in front of the burned ruins of the Daily Record, a black-owned newspaper. That day's Wilmington coup overthrew the city's elected government and forced black leaders and their allies out of power. Western Front, 1916. British soldiers use a daylight signaling lamp from a crater to send coded flashes to distant units. Before reliable field radio, light signals carried messages when wire lines were broken. During the Wallal solar eclipse expedition in 1922, astronomers used glass photographic plates to compare star positions near the Sun with the same stars at night. The measured shift matched Einstein's general relativity prediction and reinforced the earlier 1919 eclipse test. Spain, 1938. Nurses raise the nationalist salute as General Francisco Franco visits during the Spanish Civil War. After the nationalist victory in 1939, Franco led Spain as head of state until 1975. Rotterdam, 1949. A Volkswagen Beetle is hoisted by crane onto a ship bound for New York. These early exports helped launch Volkswagen's United States sales push that turned the Beetle into one of the best-selling cars in history. A Victorian house has been knocked off its foundation and left leaning after an earthquake. This image is often attributed to the San Francisco earthquake of 1906, when ground movement and liquefaction made buildings slide and tilt like this. A blowout oil well shoots a tall column of burning oil and gas, while workers and drilling rigs stand nearby. Such gushers were common in the early oil boom before modern blowout preventers and well control methods. A United States soldier wears an M1 helmet with a deep projectile strike and the date, July 15, 1969, written beside the damage. The M1 steel helmet, introduced in 1941, was designed mainly to stop flying fragments, and soldiers often saved or marked helmets that took a hit. John F. Kennedy rides a horse at an industrial site while workers walk alongside, likely during a public visit while he was president from 1961 to 1963. Without a verified caption, the exact date, location, and event for this specific photo cannot be confirmed from the image alone. A vintage circus photo shows a clown performing face-to-face with a trained lion in the ring. Big cat acts were a major ticket draw in 19th and 20th century circuses in Europe and the United States. London, 1979. Piles of uncollected refuse fill the streets during the dustmen's strike, part of the winter of discontent wave of public sector stoppages. The waste collection breakdown became one of the most famous images of Britain's late 1970s labor unrest. Eastern Front, 1942. A Hungarian soldier wades through the Don River as smoke rises on the horizon near the Don Bend front line. Hungary's Second Army held this sector in 1942 and was devastated during the Soviet offensive in January 1943. A stage hypnosis performer demonstrates rigidity by standing on a volunteer held straight between supports, a common theater act in the mid-20th century. The exact name and claim of medical evaluation are not verifiable from the image. New York, 1968. A waitress wears a menu outfit with item names and prices written on the fabric while taking an order at a table. This human menu style was used as a publicity gimmick by some restaurants in the 1960s. An early motor car sits surrounded by onlookers after a crash, a rare look at how little protection the first vehicles had. This photo is widely reposted as Britain's first fatal car accident on February 25, 1890. But the first claim is not reliably confirmed from the image alone. 1916. Workers assemble rows of artificial legs in a workshop during the First World War, when mass amputations created huge demand for prosthetics. Industrial production replaced earlier handmade limbs, allowing thousands of injured soldiers to be fitted faster. New York City, November 1938. Fur workers march with signs calling for a boycott of German goods and condemning Nazi attacks on Jewish people. The protest followed the November 9th to November 10th, 1938 pogrom in Germany and Austria, which triggered global outrage and demonstrations. Toronto, mid-1970s. Ironworkers assemble the Canadian National Tower high above the city during its construction. Finished in 1976 at 553.3 meters, it was the world's tallest freestanding structure until 2007. United States Army trainees drill with an oversized training rifle on a parade field in front of a general subjects and tactics and weapons sign. Such giant replicas were used to teach safe handling positions and movements before recruits practiced with real rifles. Tokyo Bay, September 2nd, 1945. The battleship USS Missouri sits at anchor surrounded by small boats on the day Japan signed its formal surrender on her deck. The surrender documents from this ceremony were flown to Washington, and Missouri became the best-known ship of the Pacific War's final moment. 1920s dental care often used a foot-powered drill, with a pedal driving a belt that spun the handpiece. Electric dental drills became common later, replacing the slower treadle systems in many clinics. London, late 19th century. Men sleep in four-penny coffins, narrow wooden boxes used as the cheapest pay per night shelter beds. The name came from the 4-pence fee, and the boxes were built to pack many sleepers into one room. Portland, Oregon. The Forestry Building was built in 1905 for the Lewis and Clark Centennial Exposition, using huge unpeeled logs as interior columns. It was destroyed by fire in 1964, ending one of the largest log-constructed buildings ever built in the United States. Spain, 1936. Armed men ride a small tracked farm tractor used as an improvised fighting vehicle during the early Spanish Civil War. Both sides pressed civilian machinery into service because armored vehicles and weapons were scarce in the first months of the conflict. A German leader is photographed with his German Shepherd Blondie, a dog he kept during the Second World War. In the Berlin bunker in 1945, Blondie reportedly died after a capsule was tested on her, according to eyewitness accounts. During World War I, German troops were the first to use portable flame weapons on the battlefield. Backpack tanks fed fuel through a nozzle, and the stream could reach about 40 meters in ideal conditions. For The Wizard of Oz, in 1939, the tornado effect was made with a long muslin sock shaped like a funnel, rigged on a crane, and moved through the set. The crew also filmed real storm clouds on location and combined them with the stage footage to sell the illusion. 1997. The Titanic film crew built parts of the ship set upside down, so lights and cameras could reach angles that were impossible on a normal stage. After the image was flipped, the ceiling became the hull facing the water, making the scene feel massive and unreal. X-ray of a Chinese woman's bound feet reveals toes curled under and bones reshaped into the lotus foot form. Foot binding spread in China around the 10th century and was formally banned in 1912, yet it continued in some areas for decades. Hand-colored expedition portrait of George Mallory and Andrew Sandy Irvin before their Everest attempt in 1924. They were last seen on June 8, 1924 near the summit. Mallory was found in 1999, and Irvin is still missing with a camera that could rewrite who reached the top first. A British medical officer dusts women prisoners with DDT powder to kill lice and reduce typhus risk. DDT was later linked to long-lasting pollution and was banned or tightly restricted in many countries decades later. Marie Curie walks with colleagues outside a research building in the early 20th century. Her notebooks are still radioactive today and are kept in lead-lined boxes that require protective gear to handle. Mount Pinatubo blasts a towering ash cloud over the Philippines in 1991. Its sulfur haze circled the planet and cooled Earth for about a year. A Hans-grade monoplane rises over Germany in 1909, with the pilot perched above bicycle wheels and taut wires. Early engines were weak, so builders borrowed bike parts and wire bracing to cut weight and keep flying. In 1954, Marilyn Monroe sang in Korea for about 13,000 Marines of the 1st Marine Division, turning a bare hillside into a massive outdoor stage. She performed 4 shows in one day on that trip, and later said this was the most thrilling crowd of her life. In 1943, a German submarine survivor is guided aboard with his eyes covered, a standard way to stop him from learning the ship's layout. Submarine crews lived in cramped air full of diesel fumes and packed food into every gap, so a living survivor could reveal rare details no document ever captured. In June 1982, a Guatemalan partisan patrols the jungle using fresh leaves as camouflage, making a human shape vanish into the plants. Leaf cover dries and curls fast in heat. 2 Bell P-63 King Cobra fighters with Soviet Red Stars pass over Niagara Falls in 1943, a rare public glimpse of aircraft already assigned for Soviet service. The King Cobra fired a 37mm cannon through the propeller hub, and many were delivered under the Lend-Lease program. St. Paul's Cathedral rises through the smoke during the London Blitz, its dome still standing while fires burn across the city. Fire watchers and volunteer crews fought sparks on the roof for hours because one direct blaze there could have brought this skyline symbol down. Ferdinand Porsche stands beside an early Volkswagen Beetle, the simple people's car shape that later became one of the best-selling car designs in history. Look at the round headlights and smooth curves. This same basic idea survived for decades because it was cheap to build, easy to fix. In 1937, census agitators play accordions beside a warning banner trying to turn counting people into a street show. The results were soon branded sabotage. Key organizers were arrested, and the draft data was seized and sealed away. In 1905, on Sakhalin, Ainu elders gather at the Bear Festival, where a bear was treated like an honored guest from the mountains. The Ainu language is a rare isolate, and this ceremony aimed to send the guest spirit home with gifts and messages for the gods. In late December 1944, United States tank crews pose in La Glaise, Belgium, beside an abandoned armored vehicle left after an elite German column slipped away overnight. The column ran out of fuel in the Ardennes and left heavy tanks scattered around the village. Around 1910, a suffragist lifts her jacket to prove she is wearing a tailored two-piece suit, a bold break from the expected skirt in public. This kind of rational dress was both fashion and protest, showing women could claim the same practical freedom of movement men took for granted. In the early 1900s, this young woman trains with a homemade punching bag in a back courtyard, turning a rope and sack into a private gym. Women's boxing was often pushed out of public view then, so this glass negative feels like a hidden snapshot of strength practice. These players wore the letters WSP for Wyoming State Penitentiary in 1911, turning a hard place into a baseball stage. Prison lore says each win bought them more time before a final sentence date, so every inning felt like a bargaining chip. In June 1944, British soldiers ride a Bren carrier over the Caen Canal Bridge, a key shortcut out of Normandy's tight canal country. It was secured in the first minutes of the Normandy landings by glider troops. In 1960, Catholic schoolgirls make tiny Christmas angels at their desks, turning paper and thread into a whole choir on one table. These handmade ornaments were often kept for years, so one afternoon of careful hands could become a family tradition that returned every December. In the Jordan Valley, rows of canvas tents formed a sudden city for Palestinians displaced in 1948. Many camps that started like this later gained schools and medical posts, supported by the United Nations. After World War II, some Jewish survivors formed a secret group later known as Nakam, determined to strike back on a scale that would match what had been lost. Their most infamous plan to poison a city water supply was disrupted. In January 1991 in Vilnius, unarmed civilians packed the Lithuanian press house, using their bodies as a living barrier against Soviet paratroopers. This standoff was part of Lithuania's final push to keep its independence and control its own news when a building could matter as much as a border. Francesca Mann, a Jewish dancer born in 1917, became tied to a rare tale of defiance at Auschwitz in 1943. Some survivor accounts say she grabbed a guard's pistol during a moment of confusion. Then she did not survive. On August 23, 1939, Eva Braun photographed Adolf Hitler with Joseph Goebbels and Hans Frank at the Berghof as they waited for word that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact would be accepted and signed. The agreement included a secret division of Eastern Europe. In January 1942 at Changsha, a Chinese soldier braces a ZBV Vazow's 26 light machine gun on a hillside, turning a small rise into a firing platform. This Czech design spread worldwide because it was tough and easy to feed, and versions of it shaped later guns like the Bren. In 1975, Cesar Chavez, co-founder of the United Farm Workers, takes a quick food break during a 1,000-mile march across California to spotlight farm worker union votes. That same year, California passed the Agricultural Labor Relations Act. Around 1930 in London, a mobile beauty salon parked at the curb so clients could get a haircut without stepping inside a shop. The signs read, "Stop Me," showing how early car culture turned city streets into pop-up businesses long before modern food trucks. In Kuwait in 1991, more than 600 oil wells were set on fire, and the smoke turned day into twilight across the desert. Specialist crews from many countries used controlled blasts and seawater jets to cap wells because one well could burn hotter than a jet engine. In 1969, Fred Rogers spoke to the United States Senate to defend public television, arguing that calm, caring programs shape how children learn to feel and think. His testimony helped protect funding for public broadcasting. In 1930, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade filled Manhattan with early character balloons that look almost eerie by modern standards as they drifted between packed buildings. These giant inflatables were a brilliant moving billboard. This photo is often labeled as Walt Disney and Ray Kroc with the Red Cross before World War I, but that claim is doubtful because both men were teenagers then. What is true is that Disney volunteered as a Red Cross ambulance driver in France in 1918 by using an older birth date. In the late 19th century, Pope Leo XIII gave a Vatican gold medal to Angelo Mariani and even allowed his portrait to promote Vin Mariani, a coca leaf wine tonic. That coca leaf fashion later inspired an Atlanta chemist to remake a similar drink into the early formula that became Coca-Cola. In 1872, Victoria Woodhull ran for United States President with the Equal Rights Party decades before women could vote nationwide. On Election Day, she was jailed on obscenity charges linked to her newspaper. On May 6, 1937, the airship Hindenburg drifted over Manhattan like a floating building above the skyline. It was lifted by hydrogen, and that one design choice helped end passenger airships almost overnight. On January 30, 1948, Mahatma Gandhi walks to an evening prayer meeting in New Delhi with his grandnieces, Manu and Abha, captured in the last photo taken of him alive. Minutes later, his life ended. In September 1938, during the Sudetenland crisis, a French reservist shares a quick goodbye kiss before mobilization could pull him away. The street looks ordinary, but this moment sits on the thin edge between the Munich Agreement and a Europe about to fall into war. In March 1922 in South Africa, police march arrested men through a shopping street during the Rand Revolt, a miners' uprising that mixed class rage with ugly racial politics. The revolt collapsed after heavy state force, and its slogan, "Workers of the World." On December 14, 1911, Roald Amundson's team reached the South Pole and raised their flag, beating Robert Falcon Scott's expedition in the cold race to the bottom of the world. Amundsen won by planning like an engineer, using skis, dogs, and supply depots. In 1944 in England, a British soldier's wife plays an accordion for American troops, turning a doorstep into a tiny concert hall before they left for the front. That borrowed music mattered because morale was a real supply, and one familiar tune could make strangers feel like a team. In August 1962, 18-year-old Peter Fechter tried to cross the Berlin Wall near Checkpoint Charlie and collapsed in the border strip in full view of both sides. Crowds watched for nearly an hour as no one dared help, and the outrage became a turning point that forced the world to stare at how the wall worked. In 1985 in East London, a Metropolitan Police officer walks through a packed street protest, the crown badge on his helmet almost filling the frame. That decade's tense marches pushed Britain toward new crowd control tactics and helped shape the Public Order Act of 1986. In March 1944 in Italy, German soldiers pass an abandoned Elephant, a 70-ton armored vehicle built from a failed tank project and fitted with an 88mm gun. Many were left behind after breakdowns and fuel shortages. In December 1942 on Guadalcanal, United States soldiers of the 132nd Infantry repack belts and magazines beside crates of .30 caliber ammunition on the rear slope of Hill 35. The fighting for Mount Austin was decided by supply lines as much as marksmanship. In 1950, Thailand's King Bhumibol Adulyadej, Rama IX, rides in his coronation procession under ornate royal umbrellas, a living symbol carried through Bangkok's crowds. He went on to reign for 70 years, making his rule one of the longest verified monarch reigns in recorded history. On December 8, 1941, Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed a joint session of Congress a day after Pearl Harbor, with radio microphones lined up to broadcast every word nationwide. Within hours, Congress declared war. Between 1904 and 1914, crews cut through Panama with steam shovels and rail cars, carving a shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific that rewired global shipping. The project also became a medical turning point when mosquito control sharply reduced yellow fever and malaria. In 1939 in France, a crowd gathers around the country's famous falling blade device for what became the last public punishment of its kind. The scene shocked officials so much that public events like this were ended. In 1957, engineer Russell Kirsch scanned a photo of his baby son at the United States National Bureau of Standards and produced one of the first digital images, only 176 by 176 pixels, while Sputnik began circling Earth that same year. In the late 1930s, leaders of two American extremist movements posed for a handshake in front of men in white robes and pointed hoods. The scene shows how propaganda networks tried to link up and share supporters, turning a photo moment into a recruitment tool. In 1991, an Israeli family sits in a sealed room wearing gas masks during Scud missile alarms, turning an ordinary living room into an emergency shelter. Israel issued protective kits and plastic sheeting nationwide because people feared chemical agents. On November 30, 1939, the Soviet Union signed a treaty with the so-called Finnish Democratic Republic on the same day the Winter War began. The new state had almost no real control and was mainly a paper tool for legitimacy. In 1904 in St. Louis, two Tswana men entered the Olympic marathon, among the first African athletes ever seen at the Games. Their bib numbers 30 and 35 became a quiet landmark, even though they ran in borrowed gear on dusty roads in a city that hardly knew their names. In 1961, Fidel Castro and Cuban fighters celebrate after the Bay of Pigs invasion collapsed on Cuba's southern coast. The failed landing strengthened Castro at home and pushed Cuba closer to the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. On February 8, 1923, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk sits with his wife Latif Uşaklagil in Ergama village, surrounded by locals on the road to Edremit. It is a close view of the New Republic's public style, where leaders stepped into village crowds to signal a fresh start after the Empire era. During the Burma campaign in World War II, soldiers moved supplies with elephants and mahouts because jungle roads could swallow trucks in mud and rain. Each elephant could haul heavy loads for days through terrain no engine could cross. In 1898, state hospital staff posed in loose gowns and rigid face masks that made them look almost unreal. Some hospitals used full face covers for early germ control during outbreaks and for messy procedures, decades before modern plastic shields. A Kwakiutl leader holds a ceremonial copper plate, a powerful wealth symbol used at potlatch gift feasts on the Pacific Northwest coast. Its value grew with each public giveaway, and sometimes a corner was deliberately broken to prove status, so this medal could carry a whole family story. In 1958, Elvis Presley joined the United States Army as a regular draftee, and photographers followed him like he was still on stage. He refused special treatment and served as an armored reconnaissance soldier in West Germany. This blurry bicycle photo is often shared as Mahatma Gandhi, but its true origin is uncertain and it may be misattributed. What fits Gandhi for sure is the message behind it. He treated simplicity as a weapon, proving that quiet daily choices can shake an empire. In 1940, Charlie Chaplin ended The Great Dictator with a direct speech to humanity, dropping the joke and speaking straight to the camera. He released it before the United States entered World War II, making a comedy film into a bold warning while the outcome was still unknown. In 1969, Apollo 11 cameras captured the lunar surface, with the lander's shadow cutting across a world with no air, no weather, and no sound. The tiny cross marks are calibration targets on the film, so even this movie scene is also a measuring tool. On the Princess Bride set, Andre the Giant made everyone look like children because he stood about 7 feet 4 inches tall. With no stunt double even close, the crew used camera angles and custom props so his character could feel superhuman without any special effects. On November 11, 1925, Howard Carter's team began unwrapping Tutankhamun's mummy in the Valley of the Kings. Working inside Seti II's tomb turned into a makeshift lab for 9 days. In 1954, Violet Jones and Joan Lee, 2 women, posed as bride and groom to get legally married in Britain. They signed the papers as opposite sexes, were later taken to court, and each paid a 25-pound fine. An early 1900s classroom packs 3 lessons onto one board. The world is round. A noun is a name, and a full set of multiplication tables. On the right, a dunce cap marks an old punishment style, a pointy paper label meant to shame a student into obedience. Behind the scenes in Little Italy, producer Albert S. Ruddy talks with Marlon Brando while The Godfather is being filmed on real Manhattan streets in the early 1970s. The crew had to keep local groups calm and even returned the word mafia from the script. London, 1922. A nurse models an early indoor sun lamp rig with ultraviolet tubes aimed at the body. Sessions were timed to just a few minutes to mimic beach light while limiting skin damage. A British soldier sits in a World War I trench, wrapped in a thick scarf, eating from a tin mess kit. Even in the mud and cold, armies ran on small routines like hot food between artillery blasts. 2 newsboys pose outside a pool hall, newspapers under their arms, with cigarettes in hand. Before child labor laws and modern health warnings, street kids often worked long hours selling papers and copied adult habits. A packed crowd in Trafalgar Square watches the Apollo 11 moon landing on a giant outdoor screen in 1969. It was one of the first truly global live TV moments when a single broadcast pulled millions into the same story at the same time. A studio worker tags Dorothy's blue gingham dress from The Wizard of Oz for a sale. Wardrobe pieces from 1939 were cataloged like museum objects, then many ended up as rare collectibles. This portrait shows Margaret Ann Neve, born in 1792 and living until 1903. Her life bridged the 18th century, the 19th century, and the dawn of the 20th century in one timeline. The clock tower of San Francisco's Ferry Building stands behind a street of rubble after the 1906 earthquake. Before the Bay Bridge opened in 1936, most East Bay commuters passed through this gateway, and the restored marketplace keeps that role alive. A Turkish caption frames these as the same girl in two photos: arrival from her village and at school 1 year later. Before and after pairs like this were used to show how schooling could quickly change clothing, posture, and public identity. Ottoman veterans pose with early wooden arms and legs made for men injured in the Balkan conflict in 1913. The text credits Hilal-i-Ahmer, the Ottoman Red Crescent, showing how organized charity was already funding prosthetic care. Men in dark goggles watched the blinding flash of the Grable atomic test in 1953. It was the only time an artillery gun fired an actual atomic device during a desert test series. Crowds watched the French battleship Bouvet slide into the water at Lorient, France. In 1915, it was lost in the Dardanelles after striking a mine laid by the Ottoman mine layer Nusret. On June 6, 1944, Scottish piper Bill Millen played bagpipes on Sword Beach during the Normandy landings. He said the music helped men find their unit in the chaos, and later claimed captured German soldiers told him the lone piper seemed too unreal to target. Seen from the lunar module Aquarius on April 17, 1970, Apollo 13's service module drifts away with a side panel blown open. This single view was the first clear proof of the oxygen tank failure that forced the crew to use the lunar module as a lifeboat. In 1986, Australian batter Dean Jones scored 210 in Madras while fighting severe heat illness and dehydration. Doctors later gave him oxygen and intravenous fluids, and the innings became a famous example of extreme endurance. Irish aviator Lillian Bland designed and flew her homemade biplane, Mayfly, at Randallstown in 1910. She named it as a joke that it may fly, then proved backyard engineering could reach the sky. A crowd gathers outside a bank during a bank run in 1933, when fear made people rush to pull out their savings. That panic helped drive major banking reforms in the United States, including federal deposit insurance, created later that same year. Hiroshima's riverfront and street grid appear shattered in 1945, with only a few concrete shells still standing. A still debated translation of the Japanese word mokusatsu shows how one sentence can be read as "no comment" or "we dismiss it," and that ambiguity still haunts historians. Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and John Paul Richardson pose in Iowa during the Winter Dance Party Tour in 1959. A late-night charter after a coin toss became the moment later remembered as the day the music died. In 1971, during the Indo-Pakistani War, the Taj Mahal was camouflaged with bamboo and green netting to hide it from enemy bombers. India feared airstrikes, so the world's most famous mausoleum was made to look like a forest from the sky. On April 20, 1945, U.S. forces marked the 500,000th German POW captured, symbolically on Hitler's birthday. The sign wasn't propaganda. It was a cold statistic showing how completely Nazi Germany was collapsing in its final days. In 1938, massive crowds celebrated Hitler's Anschluss, the annexation of Austria into Nazi Germany, after a referendum reporting over 99% approval. The vote was heavily manipulated, and in 1943, the Allies officially declared the Anschluss illegal and void, holding Austria responsible for its role in the Nazi war machine. In 1979, cyclist Brian Allen became the first human to fly across the English Channel using only muscle power. Pedaling the aircraft Gossamer Albatross, he covered 35.8 kilometers in 2 hours 49 minutes, proving humans could achieve sustained powered flight without engines. During the Korean War retreat in 1950, U.S. Marines marched through 30-degree Celsius temperatures, often freezing before enemy contact. After the failed campaign, General MacArthur bluntly said, "We retreat because we're moving in the wrong direction." On August 29, 1965, U.S. Navy divers recovered Gemini 5 after it splashed down in the Atlantic. Astronauts Gordon Cooper and Charles Conrad had just completed a record-breaking 8-day mission, proving humans could survive long-duration spaceflight. In the early 1950s, thousands of Jews, many of them children, fled Yemen to join the newly founded State of Israel. Most were airlifted in secret during Operation Magic Carpet, one of the largest refugee evacuations in Middle Eastern history. This is British midget submarine X-6, whose crew helped cripple the German battleship Tirpitz in 1943. The daring sabotage kept Hitler's most powerful warship out of action for months and changed the naval balance in the North Atlantic. April 19, 1945. Soviet tank crews of the 66th Guards Tank Brigade pause near a Berlin suburb as the final assault begins. Within days, these units would help end the war in Europe, fighting street by street inside the German capital. In 1968, a Soviet T-54 tank crushed a civilian bus used by protesters to block the streets during Operation Danube in Czechoslovakia. The image became a stark symbol of how armored divisions were used to silence resistance and end the Prague Spring by force. In 1965, the USSR detonated an underground nuclear bomb at the Semipalatinsk test site, but the blast broke through the surface, forming a massive radioactive plume. Such failures contaminated vast areas, exposing hundreds of thousands of civilians to long-term radiation without warning. On April 18, 1945, a U.S. soldier stood inside the monument to the Battle of Leipzig, 1813, a shrine to Europe's fight against Napoleon. 132 years later, the same monument witnessed another collapse of empire as Nazi Germany reached its final days. In 1960, Che Guevara met Nikita Khrushchev in the Kremlin, sealing Cuba's alignment with the Soviet bloc. That meeting pushed the Cold War into the Western Hemisphere, directly leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis 2 years later. On February 27, 1989, armed security forces patrolled Caracas during the Caracazo riots, triggered by sudden price hikes and economic collapse. The uprising left hundreds to possibly thousands dead, exposing the deep social fracture that would later reshape Venezuelan politics. Finnish soldiers stand beside an armored steam locomotive fitted with a downward bent smokestack to force exhaust toward the ground. This clever design reduced visible smoke plumes, helping armored trains avoid aerial detection during wartime operations. In 1923, a French soldier guards coal briquettes taken from Germany as war reparations after World War I. These seizures during the occupation of the Ruhr deepened Germany's economic collapse and directly fueled the hyperinflation crisis. This KV-1 tank, nicknamed Merciless, displays kill marks: stars for enemy tanks, circles for assault guns, triangles for other armored vehicles. Such markings weren't propaganda. Soviet heavy tanks like the KV-1 could survive hits that shattered most German guns in the early war. These cliff dwellings in Mesa Verde were built by the ancestral Puebloans over 700 years ago, carved directly into rock alcoves. They vanished mysteriously around 1300, likely due to drought, leaving behind one of North America's most advanced ancient communities. February 1943, Stalingrad was liberated, marking Nazi Germany's first total annihilation of an entire field army. Over 300,000 Axis troops were killed, wounded, or captured, and the war's momentum permanently shifted against Hitler. In 1944, British paratroopers used the Royal Enfield Flying Flea, a 125cc motorcycle light enough to be dropped from aircraft without a container. About 8,000 were built using reinforced steel frames so soldiers could land and ride within minutes of touchdown. In 1968, this was the control center of the Dubna synchrophasotron, one of the world's most powerful particle accelerators. Built in the USSR, it pushed nuclear physics to the edge of the known limits, using rooms full of analog controls to do what a laptop does today. In 1871, French troops stormed and seized the barricades of the Paris Commune en rue Voltaire. The uprising was crushed within days. Around 20,000 communards were killed, making it one of the bloodiest urban crackdowns in European history. 1946, a tank graveyard in Berlin, where thousands of destroyed vehicles were piled after the war. These wrecks were melted down for steel, literally rebuilding Europe from the remains of its deadliest conflict. 1944, German soldiers captured during D-Day in Normandy, waiting barefoot to be shipped to England. Within hours, Hitler's Atlantic Wall collapsed, turning the largest amphibious invasion in history into the beginning of Germany's defeat in the West. France's Maginot Line was a massive chain of bunkers and steel defenses meant to stop a German invasion. In 1940, Germany simply went around it through Belgium, proving that static defenses can fail against mobile warfare. In the early 1900s, French engineer Claude Givaudan built an aircraft with circular wings, believing the shape would generate superior lift. The idea failed. Round wings caused massive drag and instability, proving that aerodynamics, not creativity alone, decides flight. Germany, 1923. During hyperinflation, banknotes lost value faster than people could pick them up. Millions of marks couldn't buy bread, so money was swept off streets like trash. 1914, a portrait of John Smith, known as White Wolf, an elderly Chippewa, Ojibwe, elder from Cass Lake, Minnesota. Taken as U.S. policies were dismantling native cultures, the image captures a generation that lived before reservations reshaped indigenous life forever. 1917, Nicholas II and his daughter Maria under house arrest after the February Revolution. Within a year, the former emperor and his entire family would be executed, ending over 300 years of Romanov rule. June 1982, a Guatemalan guerrilla fighter patrols the jungle during the country's brutal civil war. At its peak, the conflict left over 200,000 people dead or disappeared, with indigenous communities hit hardest. 1918, U.S. soldiers watch a film in a French military hospital wearing masks during the Spanish flu pandemic. The virus killed more people than World War I itself, proving even global wars can be eclipsed by disease. This FBI file shows Al Capone beat most criminal charges, including murder and bootlegging. In the end, America's most feared gangster was jailed not for violence, but for tax evasion. 1940s, Commander Yevdokia Bershanskaya briefs pilots of the Soviet all-female night bomber regiment. Flying unarmed wooden planes at night, the Night Witches carried out over 23,000 combat missions, terrifying German troops. Late 1920s, Alabama, roadside markets stocked with fresh fish, fruit, and cash-paying customers. This photo captures the U.S. economy at peak normality, just years before total collapse. 1916, German troops in gas masks fight in a poison-filled trench, one man readying a grenade beside a Maxim machine gun. Chemical warfare turned WWI battlefields into lethal zones where survival depended as much on air as on armor.